one of the things that we find is that in a lot of these models, we don't sit at the table in an equitable way, where money and idea has the same value. What we
Mm,
typically find in these private equity models is money is so much more elevated, and therefore the idea has to bow down to money, and that's not of God.
mm.
Because God's way is that if I have been blessed with the money and you have been blessed with the idea, we come together, we are equitable, and we then figure out how God wants us to work based on that. There is no one who is putting the exerting any control, because as soon as we think that money can exert control, we've immediately jumped into the mammon camp.
Welcome to Kingdom Over Everything. I am your host and Chief Fire Igniter, Shae Bynes. And I have with me a new friend. I love me some Patrick Kuwana. He is the CEO of Crossover Transformation Group and C3 Capital, located in Johannesburg, South Africa. Patrick, how you doing?
Doing so well, but we are missing you already. When are you coming back?
Prayerfully, I will be back in October.
Awesome. That is so good. No, we had such a amazing time meeting you. It was just such a blessing. So I'm
Yes.
really excited with what lies ahead.
Yes, for me as well. Now, we connected originally because a dear friend of mine, who you would call a dear friend and like a father figure to you as well, Ford Taylor, told me that I need to connect with you. And when we connected, I fully understood why he said that we needed to be connected. And so I'm delighted to have a conversation with you today. And I was excited to hear all the things that God's placed on your heart concerning the nation of South Africa. But what's interesting is that the message and everything that he has for you within South Africa, there's so much goodness in that I think is relevant for anyone wherever they are around the globe. And so I want to engage in that conversation. But before we do that, Patrick, we got to know a little bit about you. So why don't you share with us some key things to know about you personally and professionally before we dig right in?
Okay, so I am born, bred in Zimbabwe, um, trained up professionally as a computer engineer, and then moved over from Zimbabwe to South Africa in 1994. Got married to my lovely wife, who you
She
have
is
met
lovely.
in 1996, and we moved to South Africa, and we've been blessed with two amazing boys. Um, Worked in the information technology space for most of my corporate career, going from Hewlett Packard to Oracle, South Africa, Computer Sciences Corporation. So did my stint in the American multinational environment, and decided to step out after a whole bunch of things started happening. I started looking more at the entrepreneurship side of things, and it's very interesting, because one of the things that triggered my move out of the corporate space into more the entrepreneurship space was actually a conversation that I was having with God around, why is it that you have blessed us as Africa with such a continent that is overwhelmingly blessed with abundance, and yet we continue to be the begging bowl of the world. We haven't converted that abundance into prosperity for all.
Yes.
Um, and what's gone wrong, and how do we understand what the economy is? And that was really part of my migration out of the corporate world. But at the same time, what often happens is when you start asking these difficult questions, you can easily end up in a wilderness where you don't have answers, but at the same time, you know that what you came from is not it. And so
Yes.
we entered into that period where we were, we journeyed quite a bit through the wilderness. That's where we got to meet Fort Taylor. He also helped us quite a bit navigate that period in our lives. And we started moving more towards just studying the Bible and the Word from a perspective of God. What do you say about the economy? What do
Yes.
you say about business? And how do we better understand what that looks like? And through all of that, we eventually got to a place where crossover transformation was started. And we sort of started that mainly as a vehicle to take a lot of the understanding that God was giving us when it comes to just understanding economics from a kingdom perspective, business from a kingdom perspective, and beginning to take that teaching and also a bit of consulting. And then in 2018 was another big shift because sitting in a meeting, working with a client, and we are talking a little bit about making some major changes in that business. And the client stood up and said, well, what you are talking about is perfect. Would love to do this, but our shareholders will never allow us to do this.
Mm.
And, Shae, it was as if the voice of God just spoke and said, okay, now you're getting to the root of the issue, because for as long as money and capital is not redeemed and carrying my heart, it will always derail, even when you've got people who have a kingdom agenda. But if the money is not carrying the same heart and the same spirit, it will typically derail everything. And that led to us starting C3 Capital.
Wow. Okay. So you were focused on like leadership transformation and development from a kingdom perspective, working with leaders, CEOs and other executive leaders who had a heart for operating from a kingdom economics perspective, focusing on kingdom leadership perspective, just had a heart for that. And in the process of working with folks, this is really a question, this is what I'm hearing, that in the process of working with clients like that, you're realizing that even whatever transformation that particular leader experienced and wants to express in the culture of their company, the bottom line was when they kind of track back to trying to make change, they had to answer to a particular group of folks, in this case, the shareholders of a company. So then they're not able to put into practice the things that are on their heart to do, because they're like, I got to answer to these folks. So I want to operate in this economy, but I got to answer to this economy.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Because what we found was that it was easy enough for them to go through the journey of leadership development, the journey of cultural transformation in the organization, organizational leadership. But as soon as it got to the core of strategy and how the DNA of that business actually works,
right,
that's where we found the stumbling block. So, you look at something very simple like, we're an agricultural business. We have small scale farmers that we are sourcing from. In our strategy, is our strategy such that we are sourcing from them in an equitable way, where they're being paid fair value, or are we continuing to exploit them?
right,
But yet, we claim to have a particular culture, but when it comes to the flow of money, and
yes,
when it comes to how we measure profitability, we fall back to what is completely the world
yes,
and not kingdom. And that's where we found that we kept, as we went higher up in wanting to challenge the status quo of the DNA of the business, that's when the explosions would happen, and you'd find you can't go past that.
right. So then you said you started C3 Capital. What year was that? And then when you started, it's like, okay, how did you start? Based off of this, the revelation that you had working as a consultant on the leadership and culture transformation side to start C3 Capital. Tell me the starting point and, we'll get to where you are now, and tell me when that was too.
So that was exactly in July of 2018. And
Okay.
so I was sitting in the boardroom of this big company that we were doing some consulting with. That's when this executive just stood up and said, "We can't do this." And so I went away, and I really felt Holy Spirit saying, "I've revealed that to you so that you can understand what is really going on in businesses and what the biggest constraint is for most entrepreneurs who are carrying a kingdom vision, but who typically can't progress further because they have very little choice of where they can raise capital to be able to scale.
Right.
Or if they do go out and raise capital from sources that is not linked to their DNA and their agenda, it will typically cause them to have to lay down the God agenda of what they are doing. And so all of that became very clear. And I think for me, Shae, it was, well, Lord, this is all interesting, but I don't have any experience in investment banking. I'm not a financial, I've never worked in a venture capital firm before. I don't know how these financial people work. This is
Right.
completely, I'm clueless. And I remember thinking, okay, the next thing that I need to do is let me access my network and maybe go and meet a few people who are in the industry, who are Christians, and let me go and ask them a question. And that simple question is, how do you guys do private equity or venture capital um, that is fundamentally different to the guy who's down the road who's not a Christian?
Right.
um, and I was astounded that I think I probably had about 8, 9 meetings, and none of the people I met could categorically tell me how they have designed what they do in any way that's different to anyone else down the road, except maybe we get together in the mornings and we pray. And my response to them was, okay, so you are working with exactly the same design that the world works with.
Right.
So you are putting people into bondage in the same way that the system of the world works with. You are taking people down this journey where there is no redemption in this. There's no spirit in this, except that you're praying and you're believing God to do some things for you, but the system doesn't come from Him. That can't be right.
How did those
And so,
conversation go?
no, not too well. I mean, there's some where I'm not allowed to go back into those places anymore. But nonetheless, it was a fantastic experience. But
Yeah.
Shae, I got back and I started asking the Lord questions, and He said, ultimately, I want to birth something through you that is coming from my own heart that I will design and show you how I want to do venture capital.
Yes.
And it's my system, it's my way. It might seem ridiculous to the world, but it is what I want to do in the kingdom because, by the way, the money and the resources belong to me. And
Yes.
I will tell where I want my money to go and what I want my money invested in and what I want to build on the earth. That's not the decision that you have to make. You just have to follow my voice, do it according to my blueprint. And I need somebody who's probably not experienced in the market because the people who are too invested in the current system
Right.
are going to find it very difficult to be able to design something differently.
That's
And so
right.
I then realized, oh wow, okay, so that's what he's chosen me for. A guy who's never been in the industry, and that's
Like
my
my ignorance
assignment.
is anointed.
Absolutely. I think there's sometimes the ignorance is absolutely anointed.
I love that. I love that. So when you started C3 Capital, then, so you started with these conversations because you're trying to get an understanding of people who are in the industry, folks who are doing this, and you're realizing, okay, I can see why there's such a need for this because there needs to be redemption in the actual system itself. Now, when you and I were talking, I don't know whether this came early in your whether this thought process came early in your C3 Capital days, but I remember we were sitting in a wonderful coffee shop. Shout out to DC Coffee in Johannesburg.
Yeah.
And we were just in a small group of folks, a meetup I put together. And when you were sharing, you walked us through just like these 4 stages of capital. And you were talking about, just systematically how some were just so rooted in mammon, but we had to get to, inheritance thinking, restoration of inheritance, God's way of doing things. And you kind of walked through these kind of various levels of capital. Will you share those? And also tell me, was that part of the beginning process of you kind of processing through this stuff with God as well? Because I'm curious on the behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. It was. And so one of the main pictures that has become very foundational in everything that we're doing. And by the way, as much as it came through as a stages of capital, it also came through as stages that one can apply to the economy, or even stages that one can apply to looking at where a business currently is. And so at the very bottom, you find what we term to be exploitative capital, or it can even refer to an exploitative economy, exploitative business. And that is typically saying this is capital that is funding operations that are looking effectively just to extract and to exploit for their benefit, even at the detriment of everyone else who is in the system. So
Yes.
again, I'm sure you've probably watched some of these videos, especially from Democratic Republic of Congo. You find kids in these, in these mines who are mining, coltan, some of these critical minerals that are required even for, our laptops and everything else. They work in absolutely abomination. I mean, just abominable conditions. And yet there is a big major firm that is part of the whole system,
Right.
that is, extracting all the minerals, taking them where they sell them for, you know a big profit. So at the end
Yes.
of the day, that village is left decimated, the land is left decimated, everything is decimated. That's extractive capital. That's an extractive, exploitative business.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the reality is that a lot of our private equity models have been built upon extractive models and exploitative models because they are built purely for maximum benefit to the person who has the money, even if it means raping and pillaging everyone else in the process,
Maximizing
including
shareholder
even,
value.
absolutely, even raping and pillaging the entrepreneur who started the idea.
That
And
part.
so,
Yes.
yeah, so that's the one side, that's the low, that's the one, the lowest section of it. And again, from a spiritual perspective, that is all driven by mammon. It's driven by
Right.
greed. It's driven by selfishness, pride, everything that is completely against the kingdom is what that is based on. So the next level that you find is you will find that some organizations will begin to move into the ethical space. And so we then find ethical capital, more ethical economies, ethical businesses. At least at that point, they're now saying, hang on, let's not openly exploit and extract from the people. Let's at least do things in a way where there are some ethics involved, there are some values involved. And so it begins to operate in a lot more credible way, but it's still very much pointing towards the shareholder and the source of the money. The source of the money has power. And
Right.
so one of the things that we find is that in a lot of these models, we don't sit at the table in an equitable way, where money and idea has the same value. What we
Mm,
typically find in these private equity models is money is so much more elevated, and therefore the idea has to bow down to money, and that's not of God.
mm,
Because God's way is that if I have been blessed with the money and you have been blessed with the idea, we come together, we are equitable, and we then figure out how God wants us to work based on that. There is no one who is putting the exerting any control, because as soon as we think that money can exert control, we've immediately jumped into the mammon camp. We've immediately
yes.
jumped into the other camp.
It goes back to, so I'm always saying God is a source, everyone and everything else is a resource. And so, in what you were just describing is making, in that example, it's making money the source and the idea solely a resource, when really God is the source, and both the money and the idea are resources that should come to the table equitably and with the mind and the heart of the source.
Absolutely.
That's
That's
good.
spot on. That's spot
Yeah.
on. And so that's the ethical side. The third layer that we see, really beginning to emerge a lot more in the last few years is the whole impact investing. So it's the impact economy, it's impact businesses where they're now saying, but hang on, out of what we are making, we also need to put a little bit that, a little bit of our profits or a little bit of our revenues towards making an impact in society. So perhaps we are going to assist in the building of a school, or we're going to assist in helping this particular initiative come off the ground. And that's all good. And so
Right.
we need to certainly have a lot more of that impact coming in. But I really believe what sits at the top, and this is where, for me, I believe is the true essence of kingdom, is where we now have redemptive capital, or in another description, restorative capital.
Mm,
And what that is doing, that is recognizing that rather with impact, you're saying, well, these people need some food, and so we're going to deliver some food to them. What redemptive capital or thinking is doing is saying, but why are they hungry? What's the
mm.
root source of why they are hungry?
Come on, Patrick.
And how do we go to the root source so that they're no longer going to be hungry? So that's a difference between impact and redemptive. It's basically saying, how do we get back to God's original design so that these people can be released out of captivity and they can find the original design and begin to thrive again? So,
Which
what's the root cause?
Yes. And that makes excuse me, that makes so much sense when you're saying like you feel like that's the highest level of kingdom, because in the kingdom it's the goodness so that all may flourish and all may experience the goodness of God. And so that means looking at the whole picture. And that's exactly what you described. Okay, so I love this. So now with this framework in mind, tell me what you've been experiencing, because that's very different than the conversations that you're having with people who are kind of in the field, on the ground, doing this stuff every day. Talk to me about what you're experiencing from you seeing this and saying, I see this is the heart of God on this, and I'm going to have a business surrounding this. What have you been experiencing in the last handful of years with this? Have you been just like been crying in the wilderness with this message? Are you finding people are grabbing hold of it and you're able to kind of build? Like, what are you experiencing, Patrick?
Yeah, the first couple of years, I mean, also understanding that as all of this started to to be downloaded, we then entered into the COVID period, which again was just a whole a whole challenge in itself, which we
That's
won't
right.
talk about. But it has been the first few years really being a voice in the wilderness, trying to just shout out to everyone who would listen around the challenge concerning, are we just putting a Christian label and a kingdom label to things that are not?
Right.
Because we think that if we are Christians and I'm running a venture capital firm or I'm running a VC firm, it doesn't automatically mean my business is a kingdom business.
Right.
It just means it's a business that's being run by a Christian. Because it was that challenge to the market and to people who are in the market to actually say, well, we're Christians. We're claiming kingdom. We're claiming that this has to have a restorative effect, but the design is wrong. How do we look at the design so that we can redesign this differently? So it was definitely a few years of being that voice in the wilderness, challenging people. And as you can well imagine, when you challenge people when it comes to the issues of money, it's a difficult one to challenge. And I think one of the big challenges that we faced was that a lot of people would typically ask us, "Oh, okay, so show us where this is working." And so the next answer would be, well, I can't show you where it's working because I haven't seen it anywhere before.
Right.
And so this is an invitation for us to actually come together to seek the heart of the Lord
Yes.
so that we can build something that's probably not there, so that we
Yes.
can actually pioneer something that's not there. The first stage is not to ask me where it's been done before, because I think it hasn't been done before.
That's
And I
right.
think that was a really challenging part of the journey. I mean, I sent out, probably up to 200 plus proposals, whether to family offices, whether to Christian investment impact funds, saying this is what we want to do. We want to do it in this way. And the typical question we would get back is, where has this been done before? This is too risky. This wouldn't be good stewardship of our resources for us to get involved in something like this. And so if there's one person who's had experience of doors being closed, that's me.
You're like,
I can
it's
tell
one.
you, this is it. If you want a lesson on how to continue after 100 doors have been closed, come right here and I'll give you some lessons on that. But
Yes.
nonetheless, Shae, what it also did is, I believe it really refined us as a family,
Yeah.
myself and my wife. It refined the people that we were working with. It refined our thinking,
Yes.
but also it elevated the magnitude of why this is critical on God's heart.
Yes.
And it made me understand that this issue of money, where money is invested in, where money is flowing to, is a such a stronghold that the enemy has held and has almost held this area unchallenged. And so it's going to require more and more people to seek his face and
Yes.
ask about, what are we doing with our money? Is our money working for the kingdom, or is our money working on the other side?
Yes. That's really good. It's so funny. I just did a post on Facebook earlier today, and I was talking about the kind of the journey of a messenger's life, when God gives someone a message that's well before it's ever widely accepted, popular, widely received, or whatever. And my experience has been, and this is connected to you as well, is my experience was that I ran into three different types of folks. You've got the early adopters. So those are the ones like they hear it, it resonates, it goes from their mind to their heart, and they're like, I'm willing to engage this. Like, I'm willing to explore this. They're the early adopter, right? Might be some hiccups along the way because you're figuring it out, but but you're pioneering, right? But you're willing to do that. Then you've got the second group. So you were looking for the early adopters and all those conversations and all those proposals. Then you have the cautious optimist. And they're the ones who are like, that hit my mind and it's kind of trying to make its way to my heart, but it's getting stuck here because it's hitting across everything that I've ever known. Yes. But something inside me is like, I'm kind of willing to engage, but not until I have more proof points. So I need to look for more proof points. And those were those people that were just like, I'm not sure that this is proper stewardship. Well, it's interesting, but I don't know. Some of those people were probably cautious optimists where they're just like, I don't know if it sounds kind of good. That sounds kind of right, but that doesn't feel like proper stewardship, right now. So some of those people were probably cautious optimists. And then you got the ones who are just the skeptics that are just like, listen, that sounds like foolishness. Very interesting, but that's never going to happen. And no, and not interested, But the thing around being the messenger around something that's well ahead, at least for me, has been not focusing at all on the skeptics and focusing on, being the person who's willing to continue to share this message, looking for those early adopters and even pouring into the cautious optimists, because I believe that the early adopters actually make way for the cautious optimists. And maybe, just maybe, some of their hearts will be pricked to the skeptics as well. But none of that is my responsibility. None of that is your responsibility, Patrick. Your responsibility is to carry the message that God is giving you with faith, with patience, through obedience, with confidence and humility. And it's like, this may be for you, Patrick, a lifetime message. This could be, I don't know whether you have a sense of this, but this could be a lifetime work to see some level of fruit that the next generation then takes on for the next level, right? This feels like, because this is a big thing where you're talking about.
Absolutely. I completely agree with what you've said. I know without a shadow of a doubt that this is a lifetime thing. And a lot of the fruit of this might only really be seen in the next generation. So it's interesting because even this Saturday, I'm doing this very talk to a group of young professionals, 20 to 35.
Okay.
Because I believe that if they can get this vision early on and they begin to allow themselves to look at the world through the full kingdom lens, understanding that they might very well be working in the biggest bank in South Africa for a particular season. Perhaps the Lord is allowing them to see how the current system works. But if in their minds they're constantly thinking, oh, by the way, Lord, what would you do in this situation? And they start picking all, they're the ones who are going to come up with these systems that will completely shift things. And so I'm very aware that a big part of the calling and the assignment is just to be a mouthpiece to get the word out. And there are some, and interesting enough, we're starting to see it a little bit more and more. I mean, a couple of weeks back, we had a whole bunch of people call us literally in a week who I had spoken to probably 3-4 years ago, who are now saying, well, hang on, just tell us again what you said that last time.
Yes.
Help us to understand this. And so I believe Holy Spirit is also working in people's hearts. I think there's seeds that are planted.
Yes.
Whether that seed takes root now or in 2 years' time, we don't have any control of that.
That's right.
But the seed has gone out.
Yes.
But likewise, there are people who are also coming forward who are beginning to say, we know we need to engage in this. We know
you have found some early adopters already.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. And so for the early adopters, what's the focus? I'm curious, Because are you finding early adopters in the area of folks who are already in this industry? Or are you finding early adopters that are people who have financial resources that are like, I'm all about this in terms of where I would want to invest my funds. I would want to support a kingdom focused business. I want to support with my finances this type of model. Are you finding early adopters in kind of both of those categories?
It's actually not the industry folk. It's
Okay, so you haven't
actually
found any of those yet?
not quite there yet.
Not quite there.
It's actually mainly the business people who are, I think, whose hearts are beginning to burn to say, but hang on, my money should be working in a different way.
Yes.
Um, and I'm not too sure what that looks like,
Right.
but I know that there's a different way.
Yeah.
Um, and I think those are the people who are starting to come forward. And I think, Shae, there's a growing sentiment where I think the Lord is also really beginning to challenge people on their understanding of stewardship, of money, and of the concept around real steward. Because I always say,
I know where
for
you're
many
going.
years, I've always looked through the lens of stewardship that I need to do these particular things that I need to tick off. And I've come to realize that a lot of what we framed as being stewardship is really self-preservation. It's not stewardship.
Patrick,
So
oh my gosh. Patrick, my husband and I have had that conversation so many times.
yeah,
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
But that's that's
So
that's real talk though.
yeah, I mean,
That's real
I
talk.
believe
Yeah.
so much of Christian definitions of stewardship
Yes.
are our excuse to justify
Yes.
self-preservation.
Yeah.
And so when I look at stewardship, at the end of the day, if
Oh my
this
God.
is the Lord's resource, and this is what I love about what you teach and what you do, my number one point of call is asking, Lord, what do you want me to do with your money? Where do you want your money to work? And we were speaking to a group of business guys saying, let's look at an example. Company X might be doing so well on the New York Stock Exchange. And the way we typically think of stewardship might be, well, let me invest my money in Company X. But Company X is supporting abortion, it's supporting things that are an abomination to the Lord. And so I'm using the Lord's money to support the very thing that the Lord calls an abomination, and I'm making returns from that. Is that good stewardship? Or is good stewardship asking the question, Lord, even if that company is producing the best returns because it's actually an exploitative business, you don't want your money invested there. You want your money invested in a redemptive business. The monetary return might even seem to be lower, but this money is working for what is on your heart for you. And so that's a good stewardship decision. So it's just
Listen,
looking at all of these things.
you just said a lot. You just said a lot. But I mean, but that's real talk, because that's why there's such a mind renewal that has to happen in this area alongside it. Because if our perspective is that the only evidence that this is God and this is working is that it produces the absolute highest return, like that's the proof point, then that falls into the same mentality of people saying, oh, our only proof that we're having an influence in culture is if we're absolutely at the top of every single position in government in this area. It's like all this thinking is not, that's like not God's thinking. That's like not God's thinking. It becomes a perversion of a thought of what it means, you know? And so if we don't renew our minds in that way, that's why when I talk about profitability with kingdom driven entrepreneurs, I talk about holistic profitability. It's not just financial, it's eternal. We have to look at the whole picture. And if we're looking at things from the world's economic system, the increase from that as our gauge of God's blessing, favor, agreement, and all of those things, or it being that this being the model people should be exalting, and this is what's going to bring people into the kingdom and all that stuff, then we are not seeing from a kingdom perspective. We're looking from a purely capitalistic, only capitalistic perspective, shrouded in the name of Jesus.
Absolutely. You see, Shae, one of the traps that I believe we have fallen into, and I believe God is delivering people out of that trap, is where we've typically had a model where go out there and be the capitalist, extract value, extract whatever you're doing, make as much profit as possible. Oh, and by the way, because I've made a lot of profit, I'm going to give 10% of my big profit back to God. And that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
But meanwhile, there's a lady sitting somewhere in Cape Town who has completely been stripped of everything that she can be stripped of because your business has been part of the stripping process.
Wow.
Whereas on the other side, I'm now running a redemptive business. I'm restoring the inheritance of that lady. She's now walking in the fullness of her inheritance. I might be walking away with X amount of percentage points less of return financially, but I can guarantee you in God's return report, he is absolutely happy. And by the way, he might even open up even greater opportunities for us to go and do what might even catapult us even financially. But we have to start off with what is on his heart.
We have to fundamentally shift to a different thought around economics. It has to be a kingdom economic model. So if we're a distribution center in the kingdom of God, I love what you said at the end there, because I was also headed there, which is, so we'll think, oh, well, if I got to take a few. So basically what you're saying, Patrick and Shae, is that I've got to set my expectation that it's going to be less in order to do this thing that you're sharing about redemptive capital. And I say, even that's unlimited. That is limited thinking as well. God could do whatsoever. If he's the source, we're resources, and we're a distribution center in the kingdom of God where we can receive, freely give, operate basically wherever God's heart is. He's the one that continues to, as we sow into the kingdom, we reap from the kingdom, and he continues to increase us as we're faithful over little, and he increases us. So really, the thought process that, oh, okay, well, that just means, okay, that sounds good. I want to be in alignment with the heart of God. So I just need to set my expectations low in order to do that. That's not it either.
That's not it.
That's not it either. It's just not operating
Absolutely.
out of assumption that it's one thing or the other thing. It's whatever God desires to do. So let's just be connected to his mind and heart concerning all of it.
Yeah. I mean, I always say it's a pipe. If we are faithful to what he desires, then he says, hang on, I want to open up this pipe and put more down here, because this pipe is going to get my resources to where I want them to get to. And I believe there's that effect. So even with some of the investors that we talk to, is just saying, I believe what we often are holding on to through self-preservation, often when we step into a mindset of self-sacrifice, when God sees that, he will actually give you even more of what you were trying to hold on to, because he now says, this person is willing to follow the footsteps of my son and self-sacrifice, and out of the self-sacrificing will arise even more. It's an investment principle. It's a kingdom investment principle.
Yes.
And if we never get to that understanding or make that move, then we keep trying to self-preserve, and we are going against the script that he has written in terms of how the equation works. And so I absolutely agree with you. I mean, in fact, I even advocate for the vision around where we are saying, is it possible that if we truly do it His way, we will even get 30, 60, 90, 100-fold returns financially that the world would not even be able to touch. And in fact, it's interesting because I remember in 2018, as I was going through this, the Lord was saying, this is also going to be one of the mechanisms that bring about the shifting of wealth and resources, because even when the world see the returns that this is going to start to produce, they will be thinking, why am I keeping my money on the Joburg Stock Exchange when there is this thing over here that seems to be producing returns that are much more higher than there? And they will put their money in for greed purposes. But the
Right.
but the fact is that money, because we are selectively choosing the businesses that it goes to, it's
Yes.
going into kingdom businesses. It's
Yes.
prospering the kingdom, irrespective of what the initial motive of the money was.
Yes.
And hopefully, through them doing that, maybe the Spirit will even redeem them from their greed when they understand how we are doing it, and even the fruit of
Yes.
what's happening down further down the line with the people, the restoration of inheritance, the
Yes.
restoration, of people's wealth and all of that. So yeah,
It's so good. And there's so many layers to this, Patrick, because these conversations that we're having, they are applicable at an individual level, they're applicable at a collective level, let's say at a business level, and they're applicable at a system level. Like we're having a multi-tiered conversation around this thing, and God's in all of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think again, Shae, it's as much as we might think the kingdom is complicated, it's actually very simple.
Very simple.
It's actually it's so simple. I think God meant it to be understood by children, and so even as I laugh about that, the one thing I also discovered, because again, not being an expert in the financial world and trying to
Right.
learn certain things, oh my goodness, all I found was it was so complicated. Okay, so how do you calculate return on investment here? How do you do this? How do you do this? The language is so complicated, the terms are complicated. And as I looked at it, I thought, no, it can't be this complicated. It can't be this confusing. There must be a simple way of actually putting all this together that allows a child to be able to understand
Yes.
that if I have X amount of money, it's God's money. If I put it in here, it'll multiply, it will do this, it will do this, it will do this. And it just has to be that simple.
Yeah. And whether someone believes in God or not, it still works.
It still works.
It still works. I love this so much. I'm believing that as you're walking this out and you're continuing with the message, but you're also finding early adopters, that there will be that process of establishing some frameworks and some proof of concepts in a smaller capacity, right? Maybe it's like a handful, maybe it's a smaller pot of capital for that's going to operate with a different system for a different type of business that's looking at the holistic picture, and you're able to see that proof of concept, in those smaller ways. It's not impacting, full on systems all over the place, but it's like we're showing the proof of concept. We're showing this is what this can look
Yes.
like, and learning lessons from that then can be duplicated and multiplied over time. And I'm excited. I'm just all in on this. I'm part of your early adopter crew because you talk my language on the regular. And our heart, even with Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Movement, is to be multiplying more people with that heart and mindset. But when we talk about the framework for Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur, we have these 5 pillars. There's like identity, there's assignment, there's culture, there's assets and operations. And on the asset side, we're talking about heavenly assets and operating from heaven's economy. Like it's a whole different lens. And so our prayer is that we're continuing to also help multiply people who will begin to think from that perspective, so that they'd engage, they think about their business from that perspective. They think about, you know, their funds for their profits and what they do with their profits from that perspective, that, you know, all the layers, you know? So
Yeah.
yeah, so we're part of the
But,
early adopter crew, Patrick,
but,
and I'm glad about it.
but I think what's also great in terms of what you do as kingdom driven entrepreneur is that you are actually preparing the pipeline for where the investment needs to go to. You are
Yes.
almost preparing the very people who will scale as investment comes in. So
Yes.
the credibility that you are carrying building these organizations, at some point, you're going to be the one who's now saying, well, we've got this pool of businesses. Let's put these businesses into an investment ecosystem here.
Right.
We know them, we know
Yes.
their hearts, we know how they're operating, we know that they've got good governance and everything in place. We know that they're making kingdom impact. Investors,
Here you
here you
go.
go. So you
That's
are well
it.
in this already.
Yes, like I'm like we are in this conversation. We are in this thing. That's why I was so excited to have a conversation with you, because I mean the first conversation we had, when I just heard a little bit around this, and then the next conversation, and then by the time I got to South Africa and heard you pour that out, I was like, yeah, man, we're in the early adopter game together, and I'm actually excited to see how God moves in it and through it. I think a lot of I don't know what you think about this, Patrick, but I tend to believe that, and I'm not saying that this is fact, I'm not even saying that God said, but this is my inclination based on what I believe God's showing me, is that there's going to be an increasing need in the world's economy for there to be people to rise up to show a different way of operating economically, because we're going to need to be a solution. A friend of mine says bringing chaos into order. Like in the kingdom, we help bring chaos into order, and so we'd be a part of bringing a solution economically that brings chaos into order. And it's a big thing because you're talking about economic systems. So it seems so huge and seems so unattainable and so ridiculous. But there are solutions that in small ways then begin to grow. You know, it's like the yeast, you know, it just continues to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Shae, it's us understand, if we can really understand the amount of economic power that we actually have collectively, and
Yes.
we start to figure out how to use that collectively, we can make such a big influence. And I
Yes.
think it's not just about looking at it from an individual perspective.
Nope.
If we are truly the people of the kingdom who
Yes.
are coming into unity around the Father's heart and
Yes.
purpose, and
Yes.
we use our collective resources to begin to do certain things, we can absolutely change things in literally a blink of an eye.
Right.
It's that simple. I mean, I was in a meeting, interesting earlier on this afternoon, and I was just sharing with some of the people in the meeting. There's a report that I think it was Oxford University or something last year, where they talked about faith faith-driven in faith, faith-driven investing, and
Okay.
they were giving this the statistics. And in this report, they talk about how there is about 3.5 trillion worth of investment funds within the Islamic world. And in their report, in the Christian world, money that is actually serving a true Christian purpose, they, in that research, however they did the research, it is 320 billion. compared to 3.5 trillion that in the Islamic
Interesting.
world they've been able to put together into sovereign funds that are specifically driving their faith agenda.
Ah, that's
So
interesting.
you think about all of these things and you think, well, we are the carriers of unity and love. If only we can start to build the right systems that are birthed out of the heart of the Father, so we can begin to create these pipes that can channel his resources to
Yeah.
go where they need to go, and
Yes.
we can truly bring that fruitfulness and that
Yeah.
multiplication that he speaks about.
Yes.
And I believe the Spirit absolutely wants to do this. He's just
Yes.
waiting on.
Yes, I wholeheartedly believe it. I love it, and I think that's a great invitation to leave people with in this conversation, is just to really reflect on that and see what part of this conversation connects with you and how you think and how you operate in the kingdom. Because there's I think that he's inviting us into new ways of, and it's not even really new, it's just sometimes new for us, but it's like, inviting us into new ways for ourselves to collaborate, new ways for us to invest our time, our resources, new ways, like new for us ways of doing things. And so just really seeking God around that, I think is good. Patrick, dude, we could talk for the next 3 hours. This was so good. I'll have to have you come back again. And we could explore, what you've experienced. And also because I also think some really cool things are going to be happening across your nation. And so it would be really cool to explore some of that in the future as well. But let folks know, Patrick, how do they connect with you if they want more information about this, they're connecting with this, or more information about your business? Where do they go, Patrick?
So you can drop me an email, Patrick, as in Patrick, at C3, as in the number three, so C3 capital dot co.za. You can also just go to the website, www.c3capital.co.za. I'm also on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. Patrick Kuwana, you'll be able to find me.
Good stuff. Patrick, thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate you.
Absolute pleasure. This was so good. Thoroughly enjoyed myself.